So for those of us on the East Coast, we had a series of storms uh, kind of wiped through from Ohio out to Washington, D.C. And this morning, when I was going to go do my field photography demo, that was when my area got hit. So it's, of course, sunny right now, but I wasn't able to put together that same package I was going to. Instead, I stayed inside and I worked on putting together some other materials for you that we can go through together. Um, so before we get too far, since we did have those storms, two things. Is everybody okay? And did your sites survive? Any problems with the storm that you guys had? Any concerns, questions? All right. So policy on an archaeological site. I said this briefly in week one, but if you are on a project, your crew chief is really in charge of telling everybody to stop work when the weather gets bad. You are more than welcome to yell to your crew chief and say, hey, my cell phone says that there's lightning within so many miles or kilometers of us. Those are the things that you need to watch out for. I know of one archaeologist who has been killed by lightning. I know one, and I know of others. So it's a serious thing. We work outdoors, so all the things that you might have to worry about if you're, I don't know, a lifeguard or something like that, same thing you have to worry about if you're an archaeologist. You're outside, you're often in a field, you're the tallest thing around sometimes. You might be carrying a shovel or a metal pole. So if there's any lightning, you quit work. And luckily apps these days can tell you how close lightning strikes are forming around you. So lightning is a seek shelter. Pouring rain is a cover and wait situation. If you're in the middle of a field day and it's just going to be like a passing thunderstorm, oh, I shouldn't say thunderstorm because then it would be lightning. If there's going to be a passing shower and it's just going to rain heavily for an hour, you might have to just kind of cover everything, find some shelter for a little bit, and then come back out to work. Because we can work when it's wet, we can work when it's misting and drizzling. We just can't work when rain is actively falling down on us because your paperwork gets ruined. You can't clean your floors, you can't clean your walls, and you run the risk of the water actually eroding your work. So cover up for heavy rains, cover your unit, and take cover yourself for heavy rains. Light rains, if you're just out doing some STPs and it's kind of a little bit rainy, you might have some wet days. Screening also sucks in the rain, and because your dirt is going to start getting just mud, right? You'll just have mud in your screen. At some point, you have to tell your crew chief, I can't find anything in my screen. If you can't find anything, you're not being productive, you're not being a good archaeologist. So at some point, even just wetness can affect your work. So I wanted to bring that up since weather was an issue today for me. Questions about weather policies in archaeology? All right.
Professor, what do you do when it's super hot? Like, what do you do for heat?
That's an excellent point. Yeah, we often kind of gloss over that because we just, as archaeologists, we kind of knew we signed up for this life, and so there's a little bit of a suck it up kind of attitude for both cold and heat. But in truth, that should not be the case, right? If you work on a professional project, you should be watching out for each other. you are a team. And you might have a crew chief who's just a jackass who just says, push on through. Watch out for each other, remind each other to drink. Bring not only plenty of water with you to the field. When I worked in Yucatan, I would be gone all day, and one of these days I'll tell you about the day I quit archaeology. All right, but it would regularly be about 105 degrees and 100% sun, and it was very hard to work out there. I would have to bring 2 liters of water in my field pack hiking around all day. Now, luckily, that got a lot lighter by the end of the day. But you imagine what 2 liters of water feels like when you're carrying it around on your back all day. So do take care, watch out for each other. That's when teamwork is important. I don't want, on my cruise, nobody is ever allowed also to wear headphones, because you can have people pass out on your project, and you need to be able to yell for everybody. We had a crew chief who was diabetic and decided to go out and survey on his own, and just didn't come back for a while, and we had to go out and find him. And luckily, he was all right, but he had had enough of a heat spell that he got the stupids and got turned around, and finally he just kind of gave up and sat on a log hoping somebody will find him. So yeah, layers, I mean, everything you would do in normal heat though. Layers, buy the gear that's really ultralight, you know, those almost like parachute pants material, wicks away the moisture. I've got some shirts made out of that. It almost feels cool to the touch. Long sleeves, believe it or not, in strong sun. Long sleeves that are very breathable, so you're not getting burnt. Hats, big ass brimmed hats. That's an Indiana Jones fedora. I was looking for this is not enough when I'm working in Yucatan. I need the full brim with air holes and everything. So it's just like any other thing. You have to prepare ahead of time, and then just watch for each other. There are not stop times in my world. We don't just stop because of heat. Although in Yucatan we did have weird hours. We would start at 5:30 in the morning and stop at 1. So the day went until it got really hot, and then we did lab work in the afternoons. So you can also schedule. We would change our start date every week. Well, we would change our start time to be sunrise, because the sunrise would change. So we made sure that our start time was sunrise, so that we always worked in the coolest moments of the day. Those are the things you might have to do as an archaeologist, and you're not going to be able to change the heat, and you can't get out of the kitchen. So you have to work with what you got and take care of each other. So lots of water. Keep your first aid kit, cell phone, buddy system. Any others? Cold, by the way, is another extreme we have. Coldest I've dug in is 15 below. And that's another technical problem, because you have to get through like the frozen top layer of soil, and then the subsurface soil might not be frozen at the moment, but in that temperature, by the time you get it into your screen, it will be frozen. So then you have, instead of mud that you're smearing around, it's ice chunks. So there is a practical limit to archaeology. That's why in Alaska, they have only like a 1 month field season up in Alaska. because there's only so many out of the year that you can dig up there. And again, everything you would do to go camping in cold weather, you would need to do for archaeology. Great questions. I like this group. We have good what do you call it? The good tailgate meetings here about all this stuff. This is awesome. Other thoughts, other questions before we move on?
Is there a time? Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Is there a time whenever you're trying to maybe clear your dirt out or sift through it, and it's the rain caused it to be too wet or it's too frozen, and you would call it then or something like that?
Right. If you're in the middle of a screen, that is always a bad time to stop. So if you've already got dirt in your screen, really try and clean that out as best you can before you abandon your unit for the day. So that's another thing that people will do is, the weather's starting to change. People will say, don't put more dirt in the screen. Right? Let's start closing up. Let's start preparing for what's coming. Because if you are in the middle of a bunch of stuff, and on a complex project, you can have a lot of things going on at once. Then everybody needs to stop what they're doing. Then you've got dirt that hasn't been labeled or screened or anything in one place, and you've got something else opened over here, and you got the paperwork you need to deal with. So yeah, best to usually crew chiefs have, like I said, the apps on their phone that are warning them about what's coming so that you can anticipate some of those things. The ice, it doesn't really get colder throughout the day. You knew that was happening when you start. And so either it's working or it's not. And the crew chief might say, this isn't working, let's get out of here. That time when I was working 15 below, that was, we were miles from the truck, so there was no turning back. So we just waited for the sun to warm us up. But yeah, always try and finish what's in your screen. That's a dangerous moment because think about it. You've pulled artifacts out of the ground, but you have not bagged them or tagged them. So you have loose artifacts sitting on equipment. And if you just have to skedaddle, what have you left? You left your equipment or unscreened dirt, whatever. One trick with that is don't put it in the screen, put it in the buckets. If you have dirt that needs to be screened and it's starting to pour, put it in buckets and then use a flagging tape and put everything you would have put on the artifact bag onto your flagging tape, and you tag your bucket. And that bucket then needs to be screened the next time you come to work. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's a good tip for the bucket part, and come back to it later.
Yeah, yeah. And that does happen actually pretty often. So I'd forgotten about that one. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Amanda, you had a question.
Yeah, I wasn't here yesterday, but I watched the recording, and I was just wondering, like, if I encounter a pretty large tree root in the bottom of my test pit, or as I'm trying to, like, scrape it flat, do I just continue to, like, go around it, or?
How big are we talking? We're talking like, like a big root?
Yeah, like one that you can't cut easily with a trowel or something.
Yeah. If it's too big, even for like your, loppers or something like that, you're just going to work around that the entire time. Yeah. If you got a big taproot in there that would take like an axe to go through,
yeah,
you don't cut those.
Okay. I'm hoping I don't have that, but I might. So.
I do.
Yeah. Hopefully it's just like a little something and it'll go down.
Yeah.
So we'll see. That's a good question too. Generally speaking, I haven't gone into the gardening gear that archaeologists carry around, but it's just what you might imagine that a a homeowner might have, right? Something to do your bushes, something to clip roots and stuff around your garden, uh, those types of things. And if those types of tools are not sufficient for a root in your unit, then that root is going to stay there.
Yeah, I do have a chainsaw, but
That is not standard archaeological tool. As a
fine.
matter of fact, I've worked on a couple projects where they've given us power tools, and it's always been a bad idea. You just get into an area that's just so overgrown. We as Americans think if you just throw more power and some gasoline into it, that'll make the job easier. When in reality, you send more people to the hospital, you have more likelihood for injuries. I mean, just in general. Especially because we're not used to wearing eyewear, and we're not used to wearing earplugs. And so that's not in your standard dig kit. And archaeologists will just start going out with the power tools that their crew chief gave them, and they're chipping off stuff, flying everywhere. I had to go to the emergency room because I got a twig stuck down all the way into my ear canal and then broke off. So yeah, power tools are not standard in archaeology. You can use a weed whacker if you're comfortable with it. If a crew chief hands you a big power tool that you're not comfortable with, you're allowed to say no.
I also considered excavating with the pressure washer because that's how we dig our trenches here. But I figure I probably won't have that in the field. So
yeah, so you've done that. You've done
it works really great if you're putting in like a garden fence and you want to sink it down a little. You just cut right through the ground with a pressure washer, and it's.
Now, do you use air or water?
Water.
Really? Okay.
It's pretty messy, but.
Yeah, there is a technique in archaeology actually that uses a pressure washer, but it just is air and a big hose. I've only done this a few times because you need to be on one of those big construction sites where they have this equipment. And it's a hose that goes into a huge vacuum with a sift in it, and it'll sift all your dirt for you. And so you're pressure washing the dirt with air, and it's sucking it all up. And that's because of buried utility lines. The pressure from the air won't cut gas lines or electrical. And so if you're in a really dangerous area, but you have to dig it, that's one tool that can be used. But like, I didn't operate it. I stood and monitored 2 construction workers who did that. That's interesting to use a water pressure. I can't imagine in archaeology using the water pressure washer.
I don't think it would work for archaeology because just shit goes everywhere. Like you have to wear eye protection because you're literally just like painted in mud. But it's fun.
All righty. Well, those were 2 good questions. I don't want to cut off any others.
Hey, Doc, can I add some commentary?
Sure.
Now, just to go back to about heat injuries and cold weather injuries, I'm a casualty of both. And the thing is it's always best to remember how to practice safety, because obviously with heat injuries, you got to be dealing with cramps, exhaustion, and then the worst case scenario, the stroke. And I always wanted, when I was in the Army, I hate bringing up the Army every time, but I always tell people, you got to have makeshift shelters. You got to always have your water close by. And the thing is, you got to time yourself when you go and work, because sometimes it's best to do work. If you're like out in 110 degrees, work for like 10 to 20 minutes. If you feel that you have a heat exhaustion or heat cramp kicking in, go ahead, take a water break.
Yep.
No one's going to shame you if you're going to sit under a tree or something for 30 minutes because you're trying to rejuvenate yourself. But the thing is, though, I mean, with heat injuries, that's shit that you don't want to be dealing with, because at the end of the day, you're going to be either dead or you're gonna be hurting for a long while.
It-
And I've been in that situation in both Iraq and Afghanistan. So
yeah,
I just want to
it's
just
tough.
relay some thoughts on that.
Thanks, Eric. Somebody else was chiming in. Max?
I was just saying that I actually did find a big old taproot running right across the floor of my excavation yesterday.
Across the middle of the floor, I'm guessing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like and across the entire length of it too.
All right. Well, we dig those. Your test unit gets small real quick because you just kind of suddenly divided it into two little areas. So you have a nice challenge ahead of you. I'm sorry.
Yay. I knew that was going to happen because there's trees all over my parents' property, and they've been here as long as I've been alive. So their roots are long.
Yeah. All righty, folks. Well, as I opened this today with, I wasn't able to do my kind of video package because it was raining for me. But I came indoors and I made a little compilation of things that will get close to what I wanted to convey to you all. Again, you saw me go to week 3, which is where we are right now. I also, because I've adjusted what I am talking about today, I also put a few things in week 4. We'll get to that in a second. So we've gone over all this. I sent you out a email yesterday because I had forgotten to say that those of you who are overwhelmed with any of the terminology that we're using, here's excavation vocabulary flashcards. What's an A horizon? What's a B horizon? What do we mean by profiles or features, things like that. And then we're getting into now recording your archaeological site. Most of this PDF is more advanced than you, but for those of you who might work for like the National Park Service or something like that and have to just go out and document a whole site, you and a crew have to go document this 18th century farmstead out, in the middle of nowhere or something like that. This will set you up from taking your field photos to setting up your baseline to checking your azimuths and taking proper notes along the way. It's a colorful, detailed guide. All the equipment you'd need to. You'll notice that it is in British terms, but so again, remember there are British versus American, and I'm teaching you mostly American terminology, but still they're following the same pattern as we are doing, right? Getting started. How do we locate a site? Check existing sources like we did with SHPO's office. Go to the topo maps, everything like that. Then go and just do your walkover. Do an initial sketch. Do some mapping. So it's going to go through all of those on each page. All right. So I've uploaded that. We don't need to go through that. Today, we're talking about field photography, and we're going to talk about the best way to document what is really the boring stuff. So that PDF I was going to show you, that was like, if you want to document some Gaelic ruins in Ireland, some cool site, that's really awesome. But we're talking about 1x1 test units with dirt and rocks. How do we document that? And so this guy actually gave pretty much the lecture that I would have given you outside in front of my test unit. So I'm going to let him speak for 10 minutes. All these links are in our Blackboard. If you have trouble watching it, please just go back to it and watch it later. I'd like you to stay in the Zoom session right now so that we can stay together. This is just a pretty brief video. Ready?
So folks, we're just about to start another workshop on archaeological photography. As always, please have a pen and paper ready to take any questions that you might have and put them into interactive sessions later. We'll answer them as best we can. Watch videos back a few times if you need, or as many times as you need. This is going to be quite a brief session. It's actually quite hard to do archaeological photography online, okay? First thing I will say is this is not a session on how to take a good photograph in terms of exposure, shutter speed, etc., all right? On our sites, because they're student digs, we actually use quite automated cameras, always set to auto. So that's not the purpose of today. It's not what we're really going into. What we're trying to go into is composition, why we take archaeological photographs, what we use, how we stage them. That's what.
All right, so this is why I want you to watch this live with me. First of all, is that audio at least coming through okay? Okay. So that I'm going to chime in with things saying, okay, yes, even though this is an Irish Republican Army, even though this is an Irish archaeological project, these rules are universal. On a general project, there will be a site camera, a project camera. That camera is going to be dummy proof. It's going to be set to automatic. Use the project camera. If you don't have a project camera, use your own cell phone. It's okay.
Really what we're going to talk about, okay? The amount of work that goes into taking a photograph is directly, I guess, relative to what the photograph is going to be used for. So if you like, there's 5 or 6, or maybe even less than that, different types of photographs from an archaeological site. There's ones we use for memory aid. So sometimes we just take a photograph to physically remember what happened on site.
That's the one that archaeologists always forget to do. Take random photos that will spark your memory of what you were doing at different times. The action photos of people actually working and the site as it's being worked, because we like to stage all of our photographs and make them all look pretty, and we forget to take the ugly shots of what it actually felt like to be there and do the work. Those help us remember the process.
It could be a digger coming to backfill trenches or cuttings that you've opened. It could be there was a massive flood. You wanted to take a record shot, a memory aid of the site being flooded. So they're almost like snap photos. They're there just to capture some digital data, capture an image in a moment in time, but you can't really see them being used for much else, okay? There's what we like to call reference shots. Where you are going to be using the photograph for an illustrative point of view, that you do want to show something and that you do want to show some archaeology. There are photos that you ultimately think need to be of report quality. They're going to be put out in the public domain in reports, very much to give clear archaeological information to the viewer. And then there's photographs that you might even want to go into publication, okay? The amount of work that you do for each of those photographs is relative to how they're going to be used and what they're going to be used for. So for example, years ago, we used to spend days, sometimes even weeks, cleaning a whole site immaculately, getting it ready for a professional photographer to come in with effectively a giant selfie stick, a telescopic boom, to take post-X photographs of the site. And hundreds of man hours of work go in to just getting these few photographs, okay? When you're taking a photograph, assuming that it's an important shot, you want to make sure that it's as clear and everything is as clearly distinguished and as clearly presented as it should be. So just some basic rules of thumb that we'll run through, I should say. Firstly, you don't want anything in the shot that shouldn't be. So you want to remove any rubbish, coats, personal items, water bottles, excess tools, etc.
All right, I wish he used bullet points on this, but that's an important one. You are going to be dinged by any professional archaeologist if your staged shots, if the ones that you're trying to do to document your site include your trash, your equipment, your water bottles, even down to the tools that you were using to excavate the unit. All your tools, all your personal items get moved out of the shot except for the things that are needed in the shot.
You want the shot to be as clean as possible, which means it might need to be traveled back a second or third time even. It might need to be traveled multiple times. You want anything that is, I guess, debitage, maybe moved to the side, or rocks put out.
Okay, so what he's saying is you do a cleaning pass. It's what we often call it. A cleaning pass on everything. somebody may ask you, all right, do one more trowel scrape on everything. And you just want, for that photograph, you just want the freshest cut, because maybe you actually trowel scraped that hours ago and it's kind of dried out a little bit, and the stain isn't as nicely visible. You want a fresh cut. Another way to freshen up that he doesn't mention is a garden sprayer. So if your excavations have dried out, but you don't want to scrape it more to get a fresh cut, because you'll be digging more, you'll be removing more, you get out one of those garden sprayers like you would use to spread herbicide in your garden or something like that. It sprays a fine mist, and you just mist your excavations. I don't expect any of you to have one of those at home. If you do, make sure you're not using one that had Roundup in it, okay? Remember, like, if you used it for Roundup, which is a carcinogen, you don't use it for water. All right.
If there's grid pegs, make sure they're nice, straight, everything literally as presentable as it possibly can be. And this can be quite an investment of work at times. Sometimes you have to do quite a bit to get the site to that level of presentation, okay? When you have the site looking how you want to present it, obviously the photo will vary on what exactly you are taking. So we have a whole variety of different scales here. And this is one area all archaeologists know, that the IFRAC color scale. So not only does it have a scale bar on top, but it has the various different.
Okay, so first rule, every shot that is for presentation or report or in some form documenting things needs to have a scale in it. And he's just pointing out there are various scales, and it can range for you from you just putting something in that is of known size to having something that has the color bars on it. The color bars are because every camera might have a different white balance or something like that going on. And so since we're looking for color changes in the soils, it's nice to have one of those. Not every project has one. Don't worry if your project doesn't, but it is the nicest scale to put in, is one that has both the scale of space and also the scale of color.
Color codes, so you can see the different hues of soil conditions. And we have anything from little small scales to go with artifacts, or very small, very, very small features, right up to the meter ranging rods, okay? As I said, it's hard to simulate photography in a setting like this. So what we're going to do is we'll throw.
So he keeps putting these photos in the corners. Notice the only thing in that photo is a little scale with a black half and a white half, right? So if anything, minimally, you need a scale in each of the photos.
Up a few slides as I talk of various different photograph types.
I don't know what the hell that picture is.
Into them, okay? So you've cleaned up the whole area. You've cleaned back the archaeology. You have to make sure it's distinct, that it pings up, that the viewer can see it. Of course, you can bring the photograph into a post-processing program like Photoshop and maybe draw on lines or accentuate the edges. But it's much better if you have the archaeology, the soil differentiations, the different colors, etc., clear enough that the viewer can see this without the photograph being manipulated in any way, okay? Then you have to decide, what am I taking? What different scales do I want to use? And then finally, you have to know what information to capture with the photograph itself. So I've got two different photograph boards here, but this is obviously the preferred one. So this is a number insert board.
All right. These are a pain in the ass, but you may still end up on a project site that is using them. You have a big box of letters and numbers, and before you set up your photograph, somebody sits there and goes through all the letters and numbers and spells out everything that you want to say in your photo, and then that'll go into the shot. The much more common one, he's going to show you one that uses chalk. The thing that's happening most these days is a whiteboard. a whiteboard with a dry erase marker. So all the stuff you're seeing him put on this photo board, you would put on a whiteboard with dry erase. Now, you guys, I did not ask you to get a whiteboard with dry erase. You can use a Sharpie and blank piece of paper.
Used in archaeology for lots of other things like menus. But you'll see there's some basic information on this again. So the permit number, which you'll probably remember from previous excavations at this point, is a unique permit number for excavation here in Ferry Carrig.
That's it, Ireland.
The official name of the excavation is Newtown. You can see this was taken of a burial. This photograph is taken of a burial, so it's burial 2. And you'll remember from previous videos how we give out feature numbers, how we record features. So this particular feature number is feature 202, which is probably the cut for the burial, because presumably the fill would have been 201. It was a mid-excavation shot, and you have the date and the initials.
So notice they're putting all the same information that I've been telling you to put on every piece of paperwork, and all of the tags is also going into each photograph. So your site name, project name, site name, your locus, where you're excavating, context, date, name. Those types of things still go on all the photographs.
So all this is captured, put in with the burial, and always with a north arrow. Okay, so again, there's different varieties, there's different sizes of north arrows. So it really is down to what size of feature artifact you're taking, and indeed personal preference. So I've just taken 4/8 to give an indication. It's even down to the very smallest little north arrows that you can insert on the number board itself.
So what do we have there? We need scale, north arrow, and the label, the board. Well, what's cool about those north arrows is that they are also scales. So if you want to pick up one of those for your dig kit, that's always useful. You can have one of those and just toss it into any excavation. You've got a scale and a north arrow all ready for you. But many archaeologists do not travel with these, in which case you need to put something to measure in. So a scale bar. Your project will have a scale bar. If you don't have a scale bar, what else has measurements on it? Your rulers. Put your ruler in the shot. And then as a north arrow, if you, again, don't have one of these, what's pointy? What can point? Your trowel. So if you ever see a trowel in an archaeological photograph, it is the north arrow. Okay, so the trowel, north arrow, some type of scale. It could be a an improvised scale like your rulers, and photo board.
This board takes a little bit of time, and especially if you're working in commercial archaeology, time can be at an absolute premium on occasion, but it does look 100 times better in a report or a publication. An alternative is simply a chalkboard. Okay, you can see it doesn't look as well, but they're just trying to capture the information quickly. And this can also work quite well. So you can see most of the same information listed along here. One difference you will see, this board actually came back with me from Australia. It's talking about excavation unit instead of feature number. Okay, but we talked about the difference between excavation units and feature numbers in the previous video. So please look at that. Okay, this information, like most information in archaeology, also needs to be replicated, or some of it replicated in a digital photo register, which this is some of our archive from Newtown. So generally what we would do is we would have a single one of these sheets on a clipboard that goes into our photographic bag out on site. And when it's full, we take it off the clipboard and we put it straight into an archive, so that if it gets wet or something goes missing, we've lost one sheet rather than a whole pile of sheets. So don't leave information. It's just good housekeeping. Don't leave sheets and sheets of information accumulate on clipboards when they don't need to be. Try and get them archived away as quickly as possible. And on this sheet, you'll see some very, very simple fields, but we'll still run through them very quickly. So there is the image number. That is the unique image that the camera gives to every photograph it takes. I have been on sites where I suppose, just trying to be very thorough, renumbered the photographs from 1 up sequentially. So they may have put the site code in 17E0318, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, etc. That number that they renumber them on isn't in the metadata of the image. So it's much better to just maintain the number that the camera gives the photograph.
So he's going into a lot of detail, but really what he's saying is that with the project camera, there's a sheet. So if you take a photograph with the project camera, you record each photograph that's taken, and you do whatever the sequential numbering that your project is going to do. Some people are just going to go, this is photo 1 from this site, photo 2, photo 3, photo 4, along that left-hand column. Other projects will look at the file name of the digital camera, given to you on the digital camera, and put that file name there. That's a little smarter, in my opinion. And then the subject, the description, I'll let him explain.
Then it asks for the feature number or the artifact number, because again, you could be taking photographs of features, you could be taking them of artifacts. If it's neither of those, feel free to write in a more more accurate description, like cutting to.
For us, it'd probably
general,
be test unit number.
And then description, include the excavation stage. Is it pre-excavation, post-excavation, mid-excavation? What's the image type? Okay. And what direction are you facing? So that's the direction you are looking while you're holding the camera. So I am facing north, south, east, or west.
That's a double check on your north arrow, because again, we get the case of the stupids. You have the north arrow facing the wrong way. Note which way you're facing when you're taking the photograph. So if I'm facing south, then I should see that north arrow in me looking back at it.
And again, that's a fall safe with your north arrow, because obviously both of those things should be telling the same story. If you're saying you're looking south and the north arrow is pointing towards you, that's obviously right. And then date and initials, okay? What this obviously develops to in time is a log of every single digital photo taken on the site. You throw this into a database system, whenever you're using Excel, Access, something else, and you want to get the photos up for feature number 3004, you put it into your database and instantly you get all the photographs back. So really what we're discussing here is the paper trail and some of the information used. Typically, just to give an example of a feature, because we don't have time to run through lots of them, if I was excavating a burial, for instance, I would have these 2 ranging rods, possibly set up at right angles. As I said, demonstrations will come up on the screen anyway, around the burial, with the board in, and with a north arrow in, okay? So a north arrow of approximately this sort of size. The board I would leave in for 1 or 2 shots, and then I would take it out for the rest. So you'll have the board in to make sure the photographs are fully identified in case anything goes wrong with your log. Excuse me. In case anything goes wrong with your log, but you don't necessarily want to leave them in for every single photograph. And then I would take up much closer photos with much smaller scales, something like these, or right-angled versions of them, of areas like the sacrum, the skull, the hands, the feet, and especially any grave goods or artifacts were included in the burial, anything of note, basically. So again, I'll put up an image of a beautiful burial we excavated in Rathmolline in County Meath, where we found grave goods, which we interpret as a smoker's pouch, is going to be on some of the reading lists that you'll be looking at. And we took very, I suppose, close-up detailed photographs of those. The photography does take a bit of time staging it, so do, I guess, give it the attention it deserves, because while it's a very different record to the plans that we'll discuss in another video, it is still an equally important record. Still gives a good visual representation of what was preserved on site before you excavate it. So there's sort of the basics, guys. We'll put up a selection of the different types of shots, the memory aids, the record shots, and the report shots, so you get an impression of the different sort of photographs we take and why. And as always, if you have any questions, just scribble them down and we'll do our best to answer them and discuss this a bit more in the interactive sessions.
I gotta say, I like this guy. I just found this today, so technically, by the way, this is not standard professorial procedure to borrow somebody else's lecture and bring it in here, so please forgive me. But I think he did a really nice job introducing that. That seems to cover most of what we talk about in archaeology. I would like to bring up examples now, and we can discuss them. So right under that video, which you can watch again at your leisure, we've got in Blackboard excavation photographs, examples, both good and bad. All right, so just here's your general overall shot that somebody took of, it looks like kind of archaeology day, where maybe some volunteers came out and were doing some archaeology. This type of shot is what archaeologists always forget to take, of the people doing the work. Very often there are almost no humans in any archaeological photographs. If any of you have taken Fred Bohr's class, he talks about archaeological photography. He has a book out, by the way. It's a Hood College professor, has a book out about archaeological photography, and he's an art historian, and he talks about how there was, in the 1960s, when we decided we were all going to be scientists, we decided humans shouldn't be in our photographs anymore. So we made it all cold and scientific, and we forgot that no, actually there's this human thing of, it's an active living environment that we should probably document who was there, what was it like, etc. Now, personally, my big issue with this photograph is that the guy's sitting completely in the test unit. All right. I don't want to see you guys. We're working on 1x1s. Unless you're a very small person, you can reach everything in your unit without getting in your unit. All right. You're going to be messing up your floors, messing up your walls, no sitting on the edge of your unit. You maintain a safe distance and you reach in to your units. So that guy, I got a little issue. But Ariel, you had a question?
Hey Doc, I have a mat that I use. Now, is that going to interfere if it gets close to the edge?
You're talking like, I think I have one like that.
Well, it's not really like that. I mean, it's a little thinner. I mean, it's what we. It's a sleeping mat, basically.
Okay. So those little kneeling pads and things are awesome. Especially if we're kind of demanding as a field, so people with differential abilities are going to need to get into weird positions. So if you need to use a kneeling pad or something like that, totally cool. You can buy them for gardening supplies, but they will, if you set up a place for you to kneel and the ground is moist enough, you will slowly push in the edge of the dirt into your unit. If you always kneel in the same spot, you're going to be putting pressure there, and if the surface soil is loose enough, it will go in. So always keep that pad just at least a couple inches back from the edge. You'll see it when it starts to happen, and that's what field school is about. You know, try it. Look under your pad after 2 days of work and see what's happened with those knees digging into the ground. You are pushing the soil a little bit. By the way, that is generally speaking how archaeologists work. Teams of two. One person digs, one person screens and takes notes, and then we usually do do one level and then switch. So I would dig a level, somebody else would screen for me, then we'd take notes, and then we'd switch for the next level. So just general archaeological procedure. So let's look at some of these photos. This is a good one. That is a well-composed photo. The walls are immaculate. They have cleared all brush and any tools from around the edge. The string is still up, which gives a nice crisp corner to all of it. They actually have put little flagging tape around their corner pins so that they kind of know where they are and avoid them. It's a smart little trick. trick. The this is actually a 1x2, and as you can see, this one, they went down to some subsoil and they went down into the subsoil to test it. Here, when they got down to the subsoil, they found a circular stain, and they excavated that circular stain as its own feature. We will be covering that next week. But anyway, nice shot. Photo board, scale, and north arrow. This is how I was saying that eventually 1x1s can be built upon, and you could eventually have larger block excavations. So they took all of this down to just this level you see in the middle, and they did it all in 1x1s, found certain featurey stains and tested them out, and then went down into the subsoil in a couple of places to make sure that they were fully down in subsoil. And here they had a feature that went down further. And I can see a nice big scale. I've got a north arrow, photo board. You can see what happens when you work that long around a unit. You kill the grass just by being there. All right, not so good. Let's see if I can put this over here. There we go. I'm assuming that trowel is the north arrow, but because they also have their kneeling pad in there, that just might be them leaving their crap in the photograph. I see no photo board except for this little tag that says Pitts 5000. So I guess if you knew what site they were working at and knew the project, you might be able to look up what Pitt 5000 was, but nobody just looking at that photograph can tell me anything about that. The walls in this unit are not nearly as nice as what we've been looking at before. You see how I said that when the grass starts cascading in, it starts to kind of muddy up what you can see near the top. Bringing even just like little scissors to the field, you can give it a haircut. Notice how they're leaving things in the walls. That's good. And honestly, if your test unit looks this good on your first try, that will be acceptable. But this is not a pro look, all right? And it's certainly not a pro photograph. This was all very, I can just see from it, it's very organically rich topsoil. And then they got to some scatter of something at the bottom, but I can't tell if it's a clear stain or not because I see crumbs all over this floor. And when there are crumbs, the photograph is useless. That's why we need that fresh scrape, because look, those crumbs look like a feature. They look dark. They look mistakenly like something I should look at. Whereas I'm pretty sure we're supposed to be looking at this, but who knows? All right. Decent photo. It's got the scale in there. It's got a north arrow. It has some indication of, this is probably a reference then to what this photograph was. The main problem with this photo, of course, is the lack of a photo board. You should have a photo board with your site name, project name, site name, what is the subject of the photo, date, etc. This is moderately okay technique in terms of excavations, but you can see what makes a unit ugly eventually. These walls have gouges in them, which really masks what you can see in the profile. Now, technically, this photo was not taken to show the profile, so I'll give them a pass maybe, because they're trying to show what's at the bottom of it. Well, let's look. What are all those hairs? Roots. There are roots everywhere cascading into this. And when you're working on that, you're thinking, oh, that's not going to show up in a photograph. They show up clear as day. They're like lightning strikes across your photograph. So roots going through really mask the dirt, which is what we're interested in. The rocks themselves, did they want to have this one cleaned off or not? Because they clearly dug around it, but it's got dirt all over it. I would have given all of this stuff a brush over with a good whisk broom and cleaned a lot more around all of this. Their walls are not straight. The wall on, I guess it would be the north wall, is coming in. Well, that's at least better than it going out to where it could collapse, but it's not a straight wall. So you can see there's good and there's bad here. Okay, lots to say about this one. No photo board, no north arrow, no scale. I'm assuming it's a 1x1. Maybe it's a 3x3 foot. But we're getting into problem number 2. Lighting. Shadows are even worse than roots. Shadows make the dirt look completely different colors. And your camera can't get both the shaded and the light to be the right color at the same time. So your photographs, professional photographs, should be in 100% sunlight or 100% shade. This is at least a regular pattern where you know where the shadows are coming from. They're coming from the walls. If you have trees overhead, though, then you're going to get these spotty shadows. And that's even worse because then it looks like you got little stains in your unit. So even though this looks like a very interesting test unit, they've got this charred layer right at the base here. They must have hit this charred layer and they went across and they found all this brick, ground stone. Really interesting. I just wish I could see what was in the rest of it because the only stuff that looks good is in the shadow. So this is just an action shot. They are important. That guy should get his goddamn feet out of the unit. This is somebody excavating a feature, but I used it to show you that if you don't have shadows, look at all the play that can happen in your unit if you have shadows. You assume that that dirt on both sides of this is probably the same color, yet look at how different they turn out. Another shadow issue, but not that bad. This is moderately acceptable almost. Not a good photograph though. Is that a north arrow? I can't tell. It's not really in the frame. If that is meant to be a north arrow, it's a poor one. They're using their rod as a depth marker, which is great. You can have a depth one. You should probably also have one though going sideways because you're measuring horizontal as well as vertical. So if you're going to put one measuring element in your picture, you put it horizontally. If you want to add another one, you can put one in vertically, but generally we put one horizontally first, and no photo board. So what are you supposed to do? I had a hell of a time finding a photograph of people tarping their units because tarping your unit is an action shot and archaeologists don't take action shots. So I found this one. This is standard archaeological procedure, except for the tripod. We usually don't use tripods that often, okay? It's great to use them if you got them and you're used to it. But generally speaking, we just have a project camera in the project camera bag, And here they've got their photo board out. He's photographing down, and they're in a forest. They're going to have all of these leaves and trees and stuff, shading stuff. So they take their tarp, and this is usually at least a 2-person job, 1 person photographing, the other person holding the tarp, or maybe 2 people holding the tarp. So you guys, what are you going to do if you can't tarp it? Wait for a cloud? Wait for full sun? Or you get really, really weird and creative with making your own shadow with one hand while holding a camera in the other, and you eventually get the shadow just right over the part that you want, and you click the picture. That's just a crappy unit. But I looked later on the webpage, and that was dug by children, so I'm going to forgive them. All right. Here is one that they put in a card and a north arrow, but you've got people's knees in it and the shadow of the photographers. And you can see how bad that looks. You're barely going to notice that shadow of yourself when you take the photo. And then when you put it on your computer, you're going to go, oh, wow, that's a picture of me, not the unit. All right. Not bad. It's a pretty crappy photo board. They should put a lot more information on that photo board. But you see how you can use just a white board and put on the information that you need. They've got a scale in. Their north arrow is on the board. I would not recommend that. I like it on the ground, but it works. They've done a fair job excavating a very difficult hole. It's not great. It's not professional, but this is probably a quick CRM job. The brick is falling out, but that's because that happens naturally. I'm not faulting them for that. The walls are okay. They should have clipped all these roots. They should have brushed down all of this rock rock and brick with brushes. You would have brushed it from top to bottom, and then you would have scraped the loose stuff out of the bottom. It's a little too small to look at with you. That's a big stain though that they excavated in it. It's a pretty cool photograph if you look at it. All right, this is pretty typical. This has been photoshopped a little bit afterwards. This is a photo board like I use. This is a pretty typical photo board like I use. You'll notice it's got the site number, then what are you photographing, grid coordinates, level 3. In this case, they actually are putting actual sea level elevation on it. Date, north arrow with the trowel. I don't see a scale. No scale. And then they went into Photoshop and they put arrows at the things that they wanted to highlight in the text. That's actually pretty useful, especially when you're working with a kind of ugly topic right there. But look at this, the shadows coming in, bad shadows. This would have been so much, they put in all this work into the Photoshop work afterwards. If they could have just tarped this thing and cleaned off a little bit more, I think it would have been much better. Ariel.
Hey Doc, since this guy decided to digitize everything, can you
back up a tiny bit?
Sorry. Can you digitize the photo board and the north arrow? If that could be the case, or is it not recommended?
Yeah, it's a great question. You can replace your crappy field north arrow and field board with a digital one later, but your crappy one should be in the original. So you don't take a picture of your unit without those things and then just add them post-production. But if you just use like your notebook and a Sharpie and you want to make it look like a nice photo board, you can digitally put in a photo board on top of your scribbled notes. That's totally cool. But the original photograph needs to have the information in it, because again, it's one of these things of, what if you're not the one analyzing this? What if that photograph doesn't get looked at for a few years? You know? All right, those are my collection of field photos. Those are up in this folder right here in week 3. And then for those who want to get really into this, Keegan is really trying to improve his hand at photography. I have 3 digital field guides for archaeologists for photography right here. I do not require this as reading, but if you have a question, feel free to reference those. Questions about our photographing? All righty then. So, what time is it? You guys want a 10-minute break? Wake up a little bit, get some coffee? My clock, it's 10:10 right now. How about 15 minutes? 20, let's give you all, what do you want? Do 10 minutes. 20 after, 20, 25 after, come back. 10, 15 minutes. Pause the recording. All right, so while we're waiting for folks to come back, I just happened to mention that I have a CRM job that I agreed to do this weekend, and so they're putting in a new bridge, or doing an adjustment to this bridge over a creek, and there is a previously identified archaeological site right here, and you see they did a bunch of STPs, and then they did test units here, and they identified a site and did a report. But now the state wants to do something to this part right here, and they don't know if the site extends that far. So I've got to go in and do some testing in this area right here, and then maybe a few down this corridor, because they're going to be putting in an access road and some pad right here. So I get the engineering plans and aerial photographs, Google Earth usually, of the area. And so I'll be going in and testing right in there. All righty. Let's see, we got folks back. Yeah, it looks like people are coming back good. All right. So back to our lecture. I'm just going to do a little bit more talking today, and then you're off for the weekend. Obviously, you have, you know, I schedule this from 9 to 1 in terms of times you might need to be with me. But of course, you can do this work in your own time over the weekend if you, especially, you know, weather being what it is. You have a rain day one day, maybe you move your excavations to Friday or Saturday. I'm not so worried about any of that. You're now working kind of at your pace and checking in with me. But some people are to the point where they've got artifacts. And since we are having some bad weather, I thought, well, what do archaeological projects do on rain days when we just don't go out to the field at all? Well, two options. We just stay at home and don't dig that day, or you are asked to come in and wash artifacts. Because we don't always, although we sometimes do, wait to the end of a project to wash artifacts. So it can be that you do all your field work, just as we've been doing. You bag and tag everything. Those bags get logged, and I'll talk about that in a second, but then they kind of sit there until the end of the project when you've accumulated all of your artifacts, and then it goes back to the lab and it gets processed there. But on other projects, especially academic projects, by the way, any of you going into academia, you don't waste a day in the field that you just spent all that money getting to Turkey or Italy or Yucatan. You don't just take the day off because it's raining. So everybody does artifact processing or cataloging or some type of lab research on rain days. So let's get you started on just the basics of processing your artifacts. The one thing I don't have in here, it'll be mentioned in the cataloging artifacts web video, but as you're bringing in each bag, it is my recommendation, but not a requirement, that what you do is you start creating what is called a bag log. And I looked for a demonstration of this, but it's really just a sheet of paper that says bag number, description, bag number, description. And what you do is every day, and it's okay that you've built up a few days worth of bags, hopefully. You then go and you open up this bag log and you say, okay, I'm going to give this bag number 1. Bag number 1 was STP1 level 1. Bag number 2 was STP1 level 2. And you just kind of create these bag numbers, a running, hold on just a second. There we go. A running tally of your bags and what's in each bag. That way, when they come back from the field to the lab, there is some list of every bag that should have been collected and what is written on those tags. That way, I didn't realize I'm not sharing. There we go. Stop sharing there. So you create your bag log and you have bag 1, bag 2, bag 3, bag 4, and that way you know that all the bags got back to the lab, for instance. And then your lab director, which you may or may not play a part in that, your lab director will also use that bag list. And then they will make a note like, okay, now these artifacts have been washed. Okay, now these artifacts have been dried. And so it allows you to keep an orderly maintenance of your bags. It is best procedure. Not every project will use bag forms. I recommend them. It's to ensure that you don't lose bags, and if you ever lose tag information, it is once again recorded in that list, in that bag log. So I'm going to show you a couple of videos again. Again, I was gonna do this physically, and I definitely still will make my own video of this, but again, just because the happenstance of today, I grabbed a few of other people's videos. Let's watch them. I will comment on them, so please stay with me live, but they have been placed in week 4. They've been placed in week 4 because week 4 was when I said I would talk about washing and labeling artifacts. So These videos are there whenever you want to view them. I'd like to watch them with you now, please. This will take all told another about half an hour, and then rest of the time will be yours.
We are here in the Montpelier Archaeology Lab where a staff member is about to show us how she cleans artifacts. So, can you explain how it's done?
For artifacts like ceramics and glass, we just put them into some water and we'll scrub them clean with a toothbrush. Other artifacts like bone, we'll gently clean with a wet toothbrush, but won't submerge them because they will start to fall apart.
Okay, so that was a lot of information suddenly. What she was saying was, let me get that right. There we go. There's wet washing and there's dry washing. And then there's different kinds of wet washing. So there's wet washing where you drop the artifacts completely into the water. And you can just drop them in and then kind of pull them out one by one and wash them. And there's wet washing where you wet the brush, but you never put the artifact in the water. And that's kind of like moist washing, right? So there's that. Then there's dry washing, which is never touches water. I'm gonna play that. Her whole video is 1 minute, so let's play that one more time. Listen to which ones are which, and I will make a list of all of this, by the way, for you, so don't worry about it.
We are here in the Montpelier Archaeology Lab where a staff member is about to show us how she cleans artifacts. So, can you explain how it's done?
For artifacts like ceramics and glass, we just put them into some water and we'll scrub them clean with a toothbrush. Other artifacts like bone, we'll gently clean with a wet toothbrush, but won't submerge them because they will start to fall apart.
So, I heard that you don't wash iron artifacts. Why is that?
The water will make iron continue to corrode, so we'll just clean those off.
With a dry metal brush usually.
Dry metal brush and take off the layer of dirt so we can identify them.
Okay, so what happens to the artifacts once they've been cleaned?
Once they're cleaned, we'll set them in the drying rack for a couple of days to ensure that they're dry, and then they'll be cataloged by our staff members. So they're identified and recorded for our future research in our database.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so big bullet points from this. First of all, that's the job when I'm training you guys to be field techs. The other job that comes along with this is lab tech. She's doing the lab tech job. She's not an analyst. She's not the one identifying all of the artifacts and categorizing them or things like that. She might do data entry, but generally speaking, your entry-level archaeologist is a field tech during the nice days and a lab tech on the nasty days. Winter, for instance, is often the lab season. You've accumulated all these artifacts over the summer and they get processed in the winter. So you may be doing this job for days, weeks, maybe. I'm going to point out a few things that are going to be pointed out again and again, and that's because they're important. Certain artifacts get washed wet, certain artifacts get washed dry, but everything stays together. Each level that you excavate, each context, whether it be that feature that you dug out, that level, that STP, everything stays from its same context and moves along the process together. And you keep that plastic bag and that tag that was in the bag right there with all the artifacts at all times. And you don't open up multiple bags at the same time, having the artifacts out together. You work on one context at a time, finish that context, put it onto a drying rack, you'll see there, and I'll talk about drying racks in a second. And then you put the bag and the tag on the drying rack with the artifacts, because you just want to keep all that information with that the whole time. And drying racks should not ideally have more than one context on the drying rack at a time. You can, if you have a big drying rack and you put 2 contexts on it, we literally make sure and keep those separate. We'll take masking tape and we'll make a big line down the drying rack saying, this side is this context, that side is that context. All right, so video number 2.
Hi, I'm Lauren Jones. I work as the lab technician here at Ferry Farm, down in the archaeology lab. I have a hand in every level of artifact processing. The artifacts come in from the field in bags like this. They're dirty, nobody's really looked at them yet, and the first step towards setting them is washing them to see what we have. So I'm going to sort the artifacts by type of material, and sorting makes washing the artifacts easier. We use a few different tools for cleaning the artifacts. Primarily, we scrub them with a toothbrush. But for tricky artifacts, such as pipe stems or particularly delicate items, we'll use dental picks to remove dirt from crevices or holes. For a context with this many artifacts, I would say at least 3 hours. It takes a long time to wash, especially since we try and pay attention to details rather than wash really quickly. We want to make sure everything gets clean, because if it's not as clean as it should be, it's a lot harder to identify the artifact. Once they're done being washed, we give them a final rinse. And then we lay them out on the tray, so nothing overlaps. And we keep the artifacts with their grouping, which makes it easier to bag later.
All right, so a couple things to note. She washed that metal. I saw her pull the metal out of the water. I wouldn't recommend that. Water really does not help get any of that rust off. The dry brushing is sufficient, and honestly, they're rusty nails. You're only gonna be able to identify so much about it. So dry brush the dirt off the metal. Again, bone, you would dump your toothbrush in the water, but you wouldn't drop the bone in the water. Shell, similar. Shell, if you start touching your shell with water and it starts to disintegrate, stop. Because some shell is so degraded that just brushing it with water will make it go away. So some shells can be washed with water, some can't. Just be very careful with things like bone and shell. Always start with just a little bit of moist. Ceramics, 99% of ceramics can be just dumped in the water and pulled out one by one and washed. The things you want to make sure that you get clean are the edges, the broken edges of the ceramic, because that's what your ceramics analysis person is going to do. They're going to look at the paste and the inclusions and things like that. So they need to see the fresh broken cut of any of your artifacts. So you need to get them not just on the surfaces, but on the edges. Lithics, Native American lithics, dump them in, pull them out, wash them. Native American ceramics, though. They are lower fired, more potential to be damaged in the process. Test one with a little damp brush or just do dry brushing. Native American ceramics are much more delicate. Never just dump them into water unless you're working at a particular culture with a particular site that really made good ceramics. All right. Glass. You'll see some people say that's another category you don't just dump into your water. I always do. The reason that they say don't is because what do you have to do to then clean them? Put your hand into a bucket of glass and pull out glass to wash it. So that's a safety thing. Also, glass is really hard to see in water. So it's often good to use, as she was using, a spaghetti strainer over your bucket. Keep everything together. All right, next one.
Hey, Dr. Hickson, quick question.
Yes, please, anytime, jump in anytime.
Is it common practice for like the lab peoples not to be wearing gloves?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you're thinking about personal protective equipment, or you're talking about the artifacts, are you worried about yourself, or are you worried about damaging the artifacts?
A little bit of both. I mean, I'm coming from mostly a science background, so I hear lab, I'm thinking you should at least have gloves on.
Right. Yeah. No, not at all. Archaeology is well behind the times in terms of making safe working environments for ourselves and our subjects. If you feel like it is best practice for yourself, nobody is going to criticize you for wearing them, but you will not be working with others that are wearing gloves. And your fingers will get raw, especially using a wire brush on the nails, because you're gonna be brushing your fingers every now and then, every few seconds. You'll get and your hands will have already pickled from being in water from something else. So you shred your hands pretty easily. So that's where personal protective equipment really comes in with the personal. If you feel like you need it, go for it, but it will not be standard practice in a lab. You work in a museum? Yeah, absolutely. Museums, it's so funny, the difference between an archaeology lab and a museum. Museum, everybody puts on white gloves, and nobody's supposed to touch anything, and everything's in a perfect little container with cushioning. And here we are dumping all those same ceramic sherds into a bucket and just pulling them out one by one and, roughing them up. So we're the ones that get to manhandle the artifacts. And then once they are done at the lab, then conservators and those types of people put on the gloves and try and keep them as nice as we left them.
One of the most important things that you want to do when you are cleaning artifacts is to make sure that you have your site tag on the tray where the artifacts are going to go, because obviously we need to know where the artifacts came from, which unit they were in, because if we lose that, we lose so much information. When you are cleaning artifacts, basically there are three things that you're going to do. You can call it wet brushing, dry brushing, and actually there's some that we don't clean at all. The method that you use to clean is basically based on the type of artifact that you're washing. On this tray, there's a set of assorted artifacts. Okay, and this here is carbonized corn. Because carbonized corn is so delicate, it's something that you don't really want to wash. So I just pour some in my hand. You can get a little zoom in here.
Once you collect carbonized stuff, don't dump it out into your hand a bunch of times. But it's botanicals you don't wash. If you happen to come across charred wood, charred stuff, that stuff has already, burning anything already does a chemical compositional change to an artifact, and it's more delicate. So anything that's been burned, leave it alone. Also, things that have been burned can be tested for things. So you'd be washing away char that could be used for, say, some type of radiocarbon dating or something like that. And they're also very delicate. If you have seeds, things like that. No botanicals. No.
Here, you see some pieces of it. Okay, next artifact. We actually have two kinds of bone that show up on the site. We have unburnt bone, and then what you'll find here is we also have burnt bone. There is a difference in how we wash both of these artifacts. Burnt bone you don't actually want to get wet just because when it is burnt, it does become more fragile. So for that, we would take and just actually brush off as much of the surface dirt as we can without brushing too hard, just due to the fragile nature of the bone. Okay, so this bone, because it isn't burnt, can be wet washed. So what you just want to dip your brush in the water and get into all the little areas there to clean out any of the surface dirt that you find.
All right, so in that case, he's also doing the proper, I like to call it a moist wash, right? It's the not dropping the bone in, but using water to wash it off. And then and just like with bone or shell or anything, if you start testing it and it starts to decompose, stop doing what you're doing.
All right, come here.
One final piece is the chert rock. It's basically used to make coins. This can be dunked right into the water, and it can be wet brush because it's pretty sturdy material. So just like everything else, get into all the different little nooks and crannies, get all sides of it. And when it looks like most of the dirt is gone, put it on the tray. That basically is the whole process, is how we just continue to go through and clean everything according to its material type.
All right, so the summary of all of that here is that you're going to sort everything by type. You're going to keep the tags and bags with all the artifacts as they move along. You're going to wash each type of artifact differently. But then by the time you're done washing that bag, that whole bag has stayed together, whether you washed some of it dry, some of it moist, some of it wet. It all ends up on a drying rack together. And that drying rack, except for the fact that I just picked up my damn cat, I was going to show you one of the things that you can use at home, which I plan to use because I don't have a archaeological drying rack at my house. I have an old house where you have to put in those window inserts if you want to have the screens. So I literally have window screens, right? And you can buy those at Home Depot too, the little screens that you just inset screens that you put into your window. And they make great drying racks. You can put them right on the window screen, or you can put a little newspaper down if it's inside, right? You don't want things dripping, maybe. All right. Let me check to see. I think I had one more. Come on. Oh, you're in front of it there. How do I get out? So I just wanted to show you there is an additional step, cataloging artifacts. She's going to describe that
My name is Judy Jobrad, and I am
we're barely going to touch this because honestly, this is what your lab director does, and they coordinate this kind of thing.
assistant lab supervisor here at Ferry Farm Archaeology Lab. And today I'm going to show you how we catalog a context. So the first thing I do is I take everything out of the bag. And
I forgot to mention, so after things are dried, then you're going to rebag. After a couple days, you're going to rebag. And then every type of artifact gets its own bag. So then you would bag all your lithics together, all your nails together, and you would have to write a new goddamn tag for each of those bags. Yep. And then they all go in one big bag that has another tag on it. So we get tag happy. But what you see is she's emptying it out, and she's got all the different types of artifacts that were once in that jumbled mess that we saw in that first video, now all separately bagged.
I sort it by material. So I'm going to put all the metals that are in the context together, all the glass together.
Oh, actually, they did not use tags.
We also have bone and fall material. So we have bones, we have seashells. The tools that we need for cataloging are very simple. Of course, we do a lot of measuring. So we have a ruler, and we have a different kind of ruler. We have a scale because we do measure, besides measuring, we weigh everything. I also have this interesting little measuring tool. It measures the bores of pipe stems. According to how big the bore stem is, it corresponds roughly to an age in date. So the larger the diameter of the pipe stem, the earlier it is. So we're going to do the first artifact, and it happens to be a piece of brick. So the first, I'm going to describe this brick in our database. There's some beginning information that you have to put in. You have to put in the project number, which is FF22, the context number, and this context number is 173.
And again, each project is going to have their own system for this. My suggestion would be probably the project number and or the site number. Context in our case would be the bag number, and then description of that context.
It is artifact number 1. The cataloger is myself, so I put in my initials. The artifact count, there's 1 brick, so I put in 1. If there was 2, I put in 2, et cetera, et cetera. And then the next part is where I start describing the brick. And the first category is, it is a historic artifact. It is an architectural element. The class indicates that it is ceramic, and material is a courseware. The object is a brick, so type in brick.
This is how much detail.
Is a fragment.
She's documenting a freaking brick fragment, right? And that's one out of what looked like hundreds of artifacts that came out of this context. And that's how much time she's spending on the brick frag that was found in there. So you can just imagine spending then your winter going through all the bags and doing this data entry. So all the stuff you collected during the summer, this is often the work that keeps archaeologists going through the winter months. Ariel.
Isn't all this pre-programmed though? I mean,
Yeah, she's working with a database that somebody else set up. And so you noticed when she started typing historic, it filled it out for her. When she started typing architectural, it filled it out for her. So yeah, you are working with somebody else's database. Maryland specifically has one. They're probably the most anal about everything, so they made their own. And speaking of which, so I just wanted to kind of give you a glimpse of that. That's what goes on after you've done all of your bagging. If you want to know what the standards are for Maryland, I have this PDF, Mac Lab Curation Standards. And that goes down to then after she's done all this, and you might want to curate the stuff, which means it actually then gets boxed up and stored somewhere. They have certain regulations. They will only accept artifacts that have been processed a certain way with certain types of tags in certain bags, and sometimes labeled, sometimes not. It's very specific. So if you're interested, it's technical guidelines for curation, and it goes through everything you would need. And for those of you who want to just generally see what archaeologists around, this is a little bit older, it's a 1981 publication, but it's basically, it's what do you do in between before it gets to that lady? What do you as an archaeologist need to do to care for various types of artifacts? So we looked this up the other night because Keegan found some shoe leather. So yeah, so shoe leather actually does preserve pretty well on historic sites. And Keegan found some shoe leather in his excavation unit. And I honestly had not ever looked at how to stabilize shoe leather. So we looked up this one, and they basically recommended to treat all leather as if it was or should be waterlogged, because if it dries out too much, it will just break. So I don't know, Keegan, did you have any success looking through that? Any feedback on what you ended up reading? Or do we have Keegan right now?
Basically, it just said to keep it moist or wet, depending on if it's actually waterlogged or not. So I just kind of put a wet paper towel in the baggie with it.
Smart.
And I figured that would, you know, at least keep it moist, and it would represent how like wet the dirt was whenever I pulled it out without actually putting it in dirt.
I think that sounds very smart. I think that's exactly keeping it supple, keeping it from totally drying out without trying to re-waterlog it or something. That's really smart. So anyway, if you find something and you want to look something up, this is Singley 1981 popular publication. Again, some of the things he says might be superseded by some new data. For instance, you saw everybody that in those videos, and I'm sure he says it in here, you wash things like your pipe stems. Well, hey, just last year they found out that you could get DNA off of pipe stems. So what do you do there? Well, honestly, you guys aren't doing DNA analysis of any of your stuff, so you're going to be washing your pipe stems if you find them. But if you're on some academic project and they have a budget and they might do DNA analysis of something, and you uncover a pipe stem while you're digging, my last project, we weren't even supposed to touch that with our gloved hand. We were supposed to, if we noticed a pipe stem come out, we were supposed to go grab sterile stuff and try and bag it without touching, because they might try and do DNA analysis. So things do get updated, but honestly, if you follow these regs, these recommendations on these videos, you'll be doing what most standard archaeologists are doing in America today. It won't necessarily be the cutting edge. Again, everybody you saw in here was washing all of the projectile points, Native American tools. Is it possible you are washing away the evidence of what that tool was used on? Absolutely. You might be washing away some evidence of use wear. And so there's a debate. Do you wash your tools so well so that you can have great visual inspection of them? That's the classic way of doing it. Or do you wash them just enough to kind of identify them and make sure and get all the dirt off so it doesn't continue to decompose? But you don't like scrub the hell out of it because you might be taking blood residue or something like that off of a knife. So in most archaeological contexts, we wash everything unless your field director says, oh, we're taking extra care with these. Don't wash these. Okay? Questions about that process? So I wanted to give you that in case you felt like starting to wash some of your artifacts this weekend and really get a look at what you've dug up. That's not required yet. That's technically, this was a lecture that's coming next week. I will still go into more detail about artifacts next week, but since we have the weekend coming, I figured I'd give that to you. Questions? All right. Well, folks, it is 11 o'clock my time. If it's basically your Friday afternoon for me, as far as I'm concerned, continue doing what you're doing. I'm going to hang on here and have any type of one-on-one consultations that anyone might need. So those of you who are good to go and you're okay until Monday, I will see you then. And those of you who need a little bit of consultation, please stay on the line.
Dr. Hickson?
Yes, sir.
Just to clarify real quick, for the pictures and all those procedures we talked about, that's for the end and not like reference shots during, correct?
Great question. Thank you for asking. It should be for your purposes in a field school, because you're not going to be doing that many units. Let's say every level. I want to see a photograph for every level. And that actually is about 50% of projects will do that. Some do, some don't. But generally speaking, you are not wrong if you take a picture of every completed level.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go along what I see on the top row here. So, Max?
I actually just had a little question because about the like the lab tech cleaning stuffs. Do you know where one would go maybe to like look for that job maybe?
Okay.
Because
yeah.
That's the job that I'm missing 2 days of this for, is basically that, but with COVID samples.
Yeah.
So
so if you really like lab work, you are you're like a archaeological unicorn. All right. Very few archaeologists love the lab work. So if you're a lab person, you are actually in demand. All right. So apply. You don't have experience yet, right? But you will get it. You apply to any CRM corporation. In Frederick, the big one is Goodwin and Associates.
Goodwin.
Goodwin. I have contacts at 3 others in the DC area. I can give you their names, but generally speaking, yeah, the lab. There's a phrase in archaeology that, you know, the worst day in the field beats the best day in the lab, and that's because we all signed up for this stuff to go out on adventures and something. And then there are other people who love the artifacts and love studying what can be generated from the data. And those people work in the labs, and we all love them. So it's a good job. Let me help you however I can. There's about
Yeah, definitely the DC area ones as well, because I mean the lab I'm working at right now, it's down in Gaithersburg, so I'm driving down there at 6:30 in the morning, 4 days a week.
Yeah.
So you know,
every CRM, every cultural resource management program runs their own lab. And then bigger research institutions run their own labs too. The more common ones that are just hiring kind of students are the CRM companies.
Okay.
And again, it's the same people who, once you finish this class, you would also be qualified to do the field work. So that allows you to be a flexible team member.
Yep.
And you could be, unlike most of your field techs, most field techs would be mostly in the field, and then they'll wash artifacts when they have to. You could be that opposite, where you could be like running the lab, and you could do the archaeology when they need it. You know, like,
yep.
Yeah. No, that's
that was my thought
idea.
process behind going for both of these.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, we'll talk.
Yep.
David or Sarah, did you have a question?
Not a question, just to let you know, Tuesday, I won't be at my dig site, but I'll be on Zoom, but I won't be at the dig site, so.
Totally fine. All right, thanks for letting me know.
Right. No problem.
David, did you have a question? You're just hanging on.
Oh, I was just listening to the lab work thing. Not that I'm chomping at the bit for lab work. I got a kick out of the worst day in the field beats the best day in the.
Yeah. A friend of mine, archaeologist up in Albany, he runs the State Museum archaeological program in Albany. And his field techs will come in and say, well, why aren't you washing anything? He's like, that's what that goddamn master's degree gets me. I don't have to wash that stuff anymore. But yeah, I'm one of those guys, and I hate to, I'm trying not to pass that on to my students, because it is important to do all the lab work.
I think it would be fun to a certain degree. It's mostly organizing or cataloging would be more along my lines of what.
Yeah. And if you're a detail-oriented person, then it actually is for you. You know, a detail-oriented person that likes to put the big picture together with all the details.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Make it fun. All right. Have a good weekend.
Absolutely. You too. I'll leave this line open for a little bit longer if anybody needs it.